sport, and social justice. So what is social justice? Social justice is the belief that as humans we all deserve to be treated equally no matter what circumstances we are born into. This could be anyone who is born into a family that lives at or below the poverty level, someone who was born into a family with both parents in professional positions, allowing them to live in a middle class or upper middle class family. The idea that all humans, no matter what circumstances, deserve to be treated equally. So the social part of social justice is human to human. And justice, of course, is appropriate equity. Now, there's some complicated questions when we examine the topic of social justice. The topic of social justice is complicated because it brings up these debatable questions such as, what is the definition of equal, fair, or just? Who is responsible for making sure society is just and fair? Is it the government, or is it the job of individuals, or is it both? And what does a fair and just society look like? Social justice issues can vary from anything with regards to animal rights, animal welfare, to human rights, education, and a list here on the left. You'll see race, gender, disabilities, environment, education, healthcare, public safety, immigration, poverty. Now, if you look at these, how do these intersect with sport? Well, race, we have this image here. We see John Carlos and Tommie Smith, the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, raising their fist and in a demonstration bringing awareness to the injustice of African Americans in the United States. 1968, as you know, is the same year of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And they made their protest visible here at the Olympic Games. But you can see the intersection of the intersection of social justice issues in sport in just about every one of these categories. Public safety, for example. Campaigns to make football a safer sport. With the concussion protocol now implemented upon any major hit in the NFL, these were brought on by pressure from the federal government and other individuals. So answering that previous question, is it the government, the job of individuals, or both? You might say that yes, it is a complicated question, but the response will require all parties to somehow come together and bring awareness to these issues and correct the problems in an unjust situation. Now, there are opponents of social justice. If you were to Google social justice or go to YouTube and type in the word social justice for videos, you'll see just as many videos criticizing social justice using very ignorant terms as you will find videos that are about social justice programs and social justice ideas that are positive and in an attempt to bring awareness to problems in our society. Now, the opponents of social justice generally come from dominant groups in society. In the United States, that might be white, middle class, and possibly Christian. Reasons for this, the idea that the United States is a meritocracy is far more complicated than simply saying everyone has an equal chance in this country to advance upward mobility socially, for example, in your socioeconomic background. And these are myths largely that someone from the dominant group in society who does not want to actually have these injustices brought to their attention because they feel as though they are under attack. This is not necessarily saying that someone who is white, middle class, or Christian is part of the problem. The problem is when someone uses selective perception, the idea that they only see or hear or read what they want, and they ignore examples that question their belief system. An example of that, if there is a stereotype about an African American, an African American man at a grocery store, and he is paying for his groceries. When he pulls out his wallet, and pulls out a credit card or some form of payment, someone may look to identify whether that is a form of food stamps that he is using because of a stereotype, while ignoring anyone else that might be in the same grocery store that could be African American, wearing a business suit, leaving a middle class job, a professional position, doctor, lawyer, accountant, business professional, but the person focusing on what they believe to be true, the stereotype, that's selective perception, looking at something while ignoring the vast numbers of examples that would refute those claims or stereotypes. This can be true if you look at the image here of the 1968 Olympics. There's John Carlos and Tommie Smith once again. They're walking with their fists in the air. Opponents of social justice and what they did focus largely on, and exclusively at times, the fist in the air with the black gloves. If you look at those gloves, and I believe I mentioned this in a previous PowerPoint presentation, you'll see that those represented either black power or the oppression of African Americans in the United States. But what people have largely forgotten is the jersey, the warm-up jersey on the left you can see, wide open. That was supposed to represent working class society, the working person in the United States who has depressed wages. But the press and opponents of social justice largely excluded this from historical memory at this point. And then the bare feet, or wearing socks versus shoes, that was supposed to be, again, an example of poverty and homelessness that is a problem in our country. Again, those are colorblind or colorless examples, whereas the black pride or black power fist raised clearly had something to do with social injustice of African Americans, something dominant group in society ignored or did not want to see at these Olympic Games. Looking at this image here, some of you may know who this woman is. Some of you may know what this event is about. Who is the young woman ahead of the crowd carrying a book? Why does the crowd behind her seem angry? Well, what do you think is happening in this photograph? Well, the women behind her screaming and yelling, they're irate because Little Rock Central High School on this day was to be integrated, meaning black school children could go to school with white school children. The Little Rock Nine, as the young boys and girls are referred to that were attempting to enter school this day, are pictured here. This is actually only one of the young children. The others remained at home because of the angry crowds, and this young girl did not get the information that they were waiting another day. She walked by herself to school with a mob of individuals screaming and yelling at her, shouting profanity to this young 14-year-old girl just trying to exercise her right to go to school. So social justice brings awareness to inequity in all aspects of society, and we look at things such as gender ideology and racial ideology, social class ideology, ableist ideology, and here you see gender ideology in sport. You have the problem with what is known as gender marking, and gender marking is when you have a sport such as the NBA referred to the women's NBA, whereas the men's NBA is simply the NBA. Appropriate femininity, this is a problem with gender in sport where women are expected to look a certain way, to act a certain way in sport, and really dress a certain way in sport. And you see that in some sporting events still today where women are required to wear a different uniform than men, not just because of physical bodies, but because of a gender ideology that still exists in particular sports. Infantilization. You'll notice this if you watch the Olympic Games many times. Anytime there's a sporting event where you have men and women competing on the same televised broadcast, you will notice that men are referred to sometimes by their last name, whereas women will sometimes be referred to by their first name. A lack of respect that usually exists because of this infantilization idea that women are treated similar to that of children. You have the same example when you'll hear them literally say, these girls out here are doing a great job on the soccer field, whereas they'll never refer to the U.S. men's soccer team as boys. And then sexualization and the hypersexualization of women in sport. You see that with with an example of the women's football team, the lingerie football team, for example, but also again at the Olympic Games, one of the most televised, watched broadcast events is women's beach volleyball, where they wear some of the most sexualized bikini and athletic gear, if you would call it that, and it dominates the primetime telecast. Racial ideology in sport. There have long existed racial stereotypes in sports, the sports myths that white men can't jump, and the sports myth that that African Americans may have this superior genetic makeup or an additional muscle or tendon in their body. These are the myths that people believe, and largely created by the dominant group in society, those who oppose social justice and to preserve or protect a dominant position in society that is threatened by women, African Americans, other minorities in sport. And sport and social justice, there are many programs and activities that people can get involved in and work with to try and break down some of these barriers for not only men and women, in sport and minorities, but the physically disabled and social inequality that exists in youth sport as well.